I am so thankful that we have a God who is a good Father, a God who is an example to us of what true fatherhood is all about, a God who loved us unconditionally in spite of who we are and what we've done and where we've been, a God who reached down and continues to love us, even when sometimes we do things where we don't deserve God's love. We are thankful today for our good Father. Well, happy Father's Day. I am super excited about the opportunity this morning to bring the Word of God. I am thankful to the pastor of this church, the Reverend soon-to-be Dr. R. Janae Pitts Murdock. I am a little bit biased, but I am thankful for her and for her ministry to the Light of the World Christian Church and for her ministry to countless other places throughout this country and throughout this world. I'm thankful for the global reach and the global impact that she has on a regular basis. I'm thankful for the justice work that she does here in Indianapolis. I'm thankful that I get to call her my baby. So I'm thankful to her for this opportunity this morning to preach the word. Well, I am not going to be before you long. We're going to jump right into the scripture, to the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 9, and we will be reading verses 1 through 10. 2 Samuel, chapter 9, verses 1 through 10. Now David said, "Is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" And there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. So when they had called him to David, the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" He said, "At your service." Then the king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." So the king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-debar." Then King David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lo-debar. Now, when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, "Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "Here is your servant." So David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you the kindness for Jonathan for your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually." Then he bowed himself and said, "What is your servant, that you should look upon such a dead dog as I?" And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, "I have given to Mephibosheth all that belonged to Saul and to all his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always." For a few moments this morning, we want to share from this theme, a seat at the table. A seat at the table. In our text this morning, we find the story of a young boy of royal lineage who would never be king. We are first introduced to this young boy a few chapters before this text. This young boy's name is Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth is the son of Jonathan and the grandson of King Saul. The Bible tells us that Saul and 3 of his sons were killed in battle against the Philistines. One of these sons was Mephibosheth's father, Jonathan. When the word comes to Mephibosheth's nursemaid that Saul and Jonathan had been killed in battle, the nursemaid, who had been given the responsibility of caring for Mephibosheth, decides to quickly flee with the young boy, who at the time was only 5 years old. As the nursemaid fled with Mephibosheth, the Bible says that she dropped him, causing him to be lame in both his feet for the rest of his life. The text does not tell us where the nursemaid was taking Mephibosheth. We can only presume that she was taking the child to a safe place, given the political climate of the time. We can only hope that the nursemaid was acting in the best interest of the child and was in the process of taking him someplace where he would be protected until times were better. We don't know where the nursemaid was going because the text does not tell us, but what we do know is that somewhere along the way, she dropped the boy, causing him to be lame in both feet. This action would set into motion a chain of events that would alter the trajectory of Mephibosheth's life, because now this young boy named Mephibosheth, who should have been in line to the throne of his grandfather Saul, has now been forced into a position such that he will never inherit the throne that should have eventually been his. You see, Mephibosheth had two problems. One problem was that he was young. He is too young to rule and too young to fight a war. He is too young to understand the inner workings of inter-kingdom negotiations and treaties. He is too young to produce an heir of his own. He is simply young. He had no control over the timeline of his father's death. He had no control over the time he was born, and he had no control over the other moving pieces around him, because time is something that is out of his control. Therefore, his youth is something that is also out of his control. Despite all of these facts, this first setback was no one's fault and was one that could have easily been rectified had time been allowed to run its course. He would hopefully have had the opportunity to grow older and wiser, such that he would have gained the wherewithal to walk into the position and authority that was supposed to be his. Except Mephibosheth had another problem. Mephibosheth's second problem is that he was lame in both feet. You see, Mephibosheth's plight was exponentially complicated by this physical ailment that was forced upon the hand of another person. This problem is one that was inflicted upon him by a person that was supposed to be caring for him. This problem would put a mark on him for the rest of his life. Mephibosheth finds himself in a situation where his livelihood, his inheritance, his entire future is ripped away in one fell swoop because somebody dropped him. You see, Mephibosheth was the son of royalty and heir to the throne, but he would never realize his potential because somebody dropped him. Mephibosheth should have inherited the riches of the house of Saul, but somebody dropped him. Mephibosheth should have been a ruler and a leader, but somebody dropped him. Mephibosheth should have grown up to sire a long and lasting legacy, but somebody dropped him. And if the truth be told, there are Mephibosheths among us who should have had access to prosperous futures, but have had those futures seemingly snuffed out because somebody dropped them. Our little black girls and little black boys are born into a world innocent and without blemish. Our little black girls and our little black boys are born into the world where they should be driven by unbridled hope and pure expectation of the world to love them for who they are. Our little black girls and little black boys should be able to unequivocally believe that they can be and do anything they want to be. Our little black girls and little black boys are born into a world which they should be able to trust that success is attainable to all who work hard and trust the process. But too early in their lives, our children come to the sobering reality that the world is not what it seems because somebody dropped them. It's the first time that the principal allows someone to get away with calling them a nigger in front of the whole class. Somebody dropped them. It's the first time they are pulled over by the police without cause and treated as less than human. Somebody dropped them. It's the first time that they notice that the teacher is treating them differently because of their skin color. Somebody dropped them. It's the first time their white friends' parents tell them that their white children can't play with them. Somebody dropped them. It's the first time they see the lynching of a black body by policemen on national TV and have to wonder if it will ever happen to them. Somebody dropped them. The fact of the matter is, our young black girls and our young black boys have begun to feel jaded and marginalized and fearful and angry at earlier and earlier ages because somewhere, somehow, somebody who was supposed to be taking care of them dropped them instead. Mephibosheth has found himself in a precarious position with one problem that was created by happenstance and another problem that was forced upon him by the hand of someone else. Mephibosheth is now burdened with the weight of this condition and the consequences thereof. Not only would Mephibosheth not be able to inherit the estate of his grandfather, but he has now been placed in a position to be othered simply by virtue of his condition. Broadly speaking, the term othering is understood as an undesirable objectification of another person or group. These social processes, othering is a process of stigmatization that defines another in a negative manner. This comparison of the other is often made in the service of one's own positive ulterior identity. In case you missed it, I'll say it again. The term othering is understood as an undesirable objectification of another person or group. In these social processes, othering is a process of stigmatization that defines another in a negative manner. This comparison of the other is often made in the service of one's own positive ulterior identity. You see, according to Jewish custom, the blind and the lame were historically considered outcasts and as such were othered by those in the mainstream. The blind and the lame could not offer sacrifices in the temple. The blind and the lame could not go into the holy places. The blind and the lame could not occupy the priesthood. The blind and the lame were considered impure and defected, and their physical defects, if brought into the temple, were seen as so vile that they were said to profane the temple. These people found themselves on the margins. These people were living and operating on the fringes of society without a voice. These were the ones who were forced to sit in silence as they endured the oppression of a hypocritical religious system. They were excluded from meetings and religious celebrations. They were frowned upon by those whose ideological supremacy made them believe that their lives were better. Yes, I'm talking about the folk in the Bible, but before you pass judgment on the biblical rituals and customs, I encourage you to search your own heart to see the ways in which you have fostered the alienation of the blind and the lame among us. Because if the truth be told, we have all been complicit in the othering of the Mephibosheths in our midst. We intentionally ignore the person with a defect that has caused them to be blind. We habitually shun the persons with spina bifida, paralysis, and skin diseases. We routinely ostracize the people with mental illness, and we hastily write off the persons with cognitive disabilities. If the truth be told, and we search deep within our hearts, we would have to admit that we ourselves have either knowingly or unintentionally been complicit in the othering of Mephibosheth. Oftentimes, we find ourselves treating some of God's children poorly because we too have been othered for various reasons. We have been othered because of the color of our skin. We have been othered because of our gender. We have been othered because of who we love. We We have been othered because of our lack of financial capital. We have been othered because our neighborhood in which we were raised, and because we have been othered and systematically oppressed, it is human nature for us to look to those whom we perceive as less than us, and we perpetuate the cycle of oppression. So in our text, we find that Mephibosheth has been placed in a position of being othered. But not only has Mephibosheth been in a position of being othered, he has also been exiled. In our text, we find that Mephibosheth has been living in a place called Lo Debar. For those of you who are Hebrew scholars, the word debar normally means word or thing. The prefix lo is a negator, thus the term Lo Debar would mean no word or no thing. The name of this town is not complimentary, and scholars disagree about whether or not the name was an apt description of the town. However, assuming that it is an apt description, it may have been lacking in good pasture, or the town may have been seen as insignificant, as a nothing town. In English, we might call it the middle of nowhere. In other words, Mephibosheth has been sent to a land where he didn't belong, to live with people with whom he wasn't meant to live, doing a job that he likely was not supposed to be doing, all because of a condition that was forced upon him. Exiled because of his disability was an inconvenience. Exiled because his very presence was outlawed in society. Exiled because the scowl of his infirmity was too raw to be seen publicly, and exiled because his lameness was thought to be a profanity to the very God who created him. Not only has Mephibosheth been othered, he has also been exiled. But I'm so glad that the story doesn't end there. You see, in our story this morning, we find a King David who has won many wars and conquered many enemies. We find a King David who has amassed great wealth. We find a King David who has reached the pinnacle of power and influence, and who has now decided that now is the time to use his influence to make a difference in the life of another. On this Father's Day, I believe that we can look to David for 3 examples of how to communally father the Mephibosheths in our midst. The first example that we can take from David is that we should seek out the Mephibosheths in our lives. In our text this morning, we find King David asking the question, is there still anyone who is left in the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? And there was a servant in the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. So David asked Ziba of the former king the question again, is there still not anyone in the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God? And Ziba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet. So when David said to the servant, where is he? Ziba said to the king, indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo Debar. Then the king sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lo Debar. David now finds himself in a place of privilege and influence, such that he has the power to change systems to make life better for folks he encounters. In this case, he decided to seek out members of his own extended family from the house of Saul so that he could show them the Lord's kindness. How kind of God, David says, that I would be placed in this position of prominence for such a time as this. Let me use my influence to help somebody else. In this case, though, David chose to seek out persons who met a very specific criterion of being of the house of Saul. When you are seeking out young men and young women to mentor, I submit to you, my brothers and sisters, that you might have to go beyond the 4 walls of your church. You might have to go into the juvenile centers and the jail houses. You may have to go into the homeless shelters and into the drug homes. You might have to go outside of your network of family and friends. You might have to look in the midst of the most obscure places that other folk avoid. And in case you were wondering, it might be harder than you think to seek out Mephibosheth. It may require you to sacrifice some time and energy. It may require you to give up some resources and life conveniences. It may require you to go above and beyond that which you initially thought was reasonable. And it may require you to go a distance that you had not initially planned for. But there are Mephibosheths out there in Lodabar who are just waiting for you to seek them out. The second thing we need to do is to help mentor and father the Mephibosheths in our lives is to remind them of who they are. The Bible says that King David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel from Lodabar. And when Mephibosheth had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, Mephibosheth, and he answered, Here is your servant. So David said unto him, Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan, your father's sake, and I will restore to you all of the land of Saul, your grandfather. Then Mephibosheth bowed himself and said, What is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I? Here we find Mephibosheth, who has been found and brought into the house of David. The text tells us that when he saw David, he prostrated himself before the king. And when he asked his identity, Mephibosheth identified himself as David's servant. You see, because of the ways in which the lame were treated in this time, I imagine that Mephibosheth was terrified to have been summoned to the king's court. David, in a previous chapter, had already voiced his disdain for those who were blind and lame. So it stands to reason that Mephibosheth came into the king's court expecting the worst. If we were to take a lesson from this text, we would know that once we find Mephibosheth, he may be broken. He may be tired. He may have given up. He may be downtrodden. He may be jaded. He may be distrustful. He may be troubled. He may be down and out. He may have done some wrong things in his past. But guess what? It is responsibility of us to restore him whatever state Mephibosheth is in. You see, when you find Mephibosheth, the chances are he or she will be so broken that they have forgotten the lineage into which they were born. There are Mephibosheths out there who have had their rightful inheritances snatched from them and just need one person to invest in them. There are Mephibosheths out there who have been turned away by society and they just need one person to believe in them. There are Mephibosheths out there who have convinced themselves that they are not worthy of love and just need one person to love them without abandon. There are Mephibosheths out there who are on the brink of ending it all and just need one person to speak life unto their souls. The impetus is on us to remind them of who they are and to restore them into the knowledge of the greatness that is within them. Remind them of their rightful place in history. Remind them of who they are. Remind them that they are the head and not the tail. Remind them that they are above only and not beneath. Remind them that they are fearfully and wonderfully made. Remind them that God knows the plans that God has for them. Remind them that no weapon that is formed against them shall prosper. Remind them that God shall preserve their going out and their coming in. Remind them that they are worthy to be called sons and daughters of the kingdom. Remind them. I have one more example that we can take from David as I prepare to go to my virtual seat. First, we've acknowledged that we have to seek out Mephibosheth. Second, we determined that we must remind Mephibosheth of who he is. And finally, I submit to you that we must make room for Mephibosheth. Going back to the text, it reads, And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given to Mephibosheth all that belonged to Saul and all of his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that he may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always. Now, see, if we were in the sanctuary, I would just go to my seat right there because the text says it all. Here we find Mephibosheth after losing all that he had. We find Mephibosheth after losing his father and grandfather to the Philistines. We find Mephibosheth after losing his inheritance. We find Mephibosheth after being forced into exile, after being othered, being brought back into the house that was once his grandfather's. And it's this same Mephibosheth who has been given a seat at the table. Somebody sitting in their living room or watching in their kitchen ought to take a shout break right there, because a seat at the table gives him influence. A seat at the table gives him prominence. A seat at the table gives him access. A seat at the table gives him visibility. A seat at the table gives him justice. A seat at the table gives him vindication. After examining this text a little closer, I better understand what Langston Hughes meant when he wrote, "I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to the eat in the kitchen when the company comes, but I laugh and I eat well and I grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they will see how beautiful I am and be ashamed." But Langston Hughes, I serve notice on you this morning, did not come up with this idea on his own, because this David who gave Mephibosheth a seat at the table was the same David who wrote, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies." You see, those who talk about me will see me glad because I found joy at the table. Those who wrote me off will see me fulfilled because I found love at the table. Those who wanted me to lose my mind will see me sane because I found peace at the table. Slap somebody on the couch next to you and tell them, "I got a seat at the table." On this Father's Day, I want to encourage every father figure, and every mother who is father and mother to follow this example that David sets, and to endeavor to make room at the table for the Mephibosheths in our lives. There are some of us who are already doing this. Some of us are volunteering at the local community centers. Others of you are foster parenting children who have been debilitated by a broken system. Some of you might be mentoring youth who need little help to find their way. Or some of you may be financing a dream of an up-and-coming artist or entrepreneur. Some of you are partnering with someone to bring their hopes and dreams to fruition, while others are teaching students passionately to bring out the brilliance in them. And even others are coaching young people in sports, on teams, and through life. We have fathers in this congregation, in this country, and around the world who've done all of these things and more. And if you are a father under the sound of my voice, or a mother, or anyone in this village that we call Light of the World Christian Church, and you need a place to start, I offer you this. If you can save a multitude, save the multitude. If you can save a generation, save the generation. But if you can't save a multitude and you can't save the generation, you can be like David and just save one. I hear the words penned by the Black songwriter Alma Androzo that speaks to my mission as a father in new and insightful ways. If you don't know the song, she says, "If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody that he's traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring salvation to a world once wrought, if I can spread the message as the Master taught, then my living shall not be in vain." My brothers and my sisters, on this Father's Day, I implore you to find one somebody whose life you can change for the better. Find one somebody that you can mentor, just one somebody that you can teach, one somebody that you can restore, one somebody with whom to dream, one person who will pay it forward and do the same for somebody else. One somebody that you can give a seat at the table. Why? Because if the truth be told, we too are Mephibosheth. And there was a man named Jesus who came looking for you in Lodabar. When you were low down in your mess and not a bit of good for anybody, Jesus reached down into the muck and the mire and pulled you up and cleaned you up. And as amazing as that is, that's not what earned you a seat at the table. You see, the same Jesus healed you when you were sick and saved you from your bad decisions. But that's not what earned you a seat at the table. Yes, it was Jesus who looked beyond every one of your thoughts and saw your needs. And as marvelous as that is, that's not what earned you a seat at the table. Jesus, this same Jesus, was the one who saw you not for who you used to be, but saw you for what you could become. And as much as I appreciate Jesus for that, that's not what earned you a seat at the table. You see, this Jesus picked you up and turned you around and placed your feet on solid ground. He's been your doctor in the sick room and a lawyer in the courtroom. He's been your way in and your way out. He's been bread in a starving land. He's been water when you're thirsty. He's given you mercy that you did not earn and grace that you did not deserve. And not even these things gave you a seat at the table. It wasn't until one day about 2,000 years ago, after they had tried and convicted him, even after he had done no wrong. It was on that day that they dragged my Jesus from judgment hall to judgment hall, which would sentence him to the most severe penalty of capital punishment. It was around the same time that they beat him beyond recognition, and then they put a crown of thorns on his head. The witnesses say that then they marched him up a hill called Calvary, and they put nails in his hand and in his feet. Oh, but they messed up with what they did next. You see, after they put the nails in his hands and put the nails in his feet, they messed up because they lifted up the cross, because they forgot that he said, if I be lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all men unto me. You see, because they lifted him up, the whole world could watch him as he cried out to his Father. Because they lifted him up, all the people could see him forgiving a dying thief. Because they lifted him up, people could see him repeating the Psalms of his faith. Because they lifted him up, the people could hear and see him when he said, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, and he gave up the ghost. Because they lifted him up, they could see the moment that he died. They saw the sun when it stopped shining. They felt the earth when it started trembling. They saw the moment that he died, and it was at that moment that Jesus secured for them and for us a seat at the table. Is there anybody under the sound of my voice that's glad that you got a seat at the table? Is there anybody out there that's glad that God saved you? Is there anybody out there with a testimony that God raised you? Is there anybody who can say that if it had not been for the Lord who was on my side, where would I be? Is there anybody under the sound of my voice that's glad that you have a seat at the table? A seat at the table that will give you access to change lives. A seat at the table that will give you access to change somebody's story. A seat at the table that will allow you to pay it forward. And a seat at the table that will allow you to change the world one person at a time. Is there anybody under the sound of my voice that's glad about it because they have a seat at the table? I don't know about you today, but I'm so glad that God welcomes us to his table. It is at the table that the feast of the Lord is going on. It's at the table that deliverance takes place. It's at the table that healing takes place. It's at the table that miracles are manifested. And it's at the table where God welcomes us with open arms. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter who your mother, who your father was. It doesn't matter if you were raised without a father. It doesn't matter who you are. God welcomes us to the table because he died. We have access to the table.